And I would drive past his building. It would be 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would see the light on in his office in the back of his building. And so I would knock on the door, and he'd let me in. And I remember one day I said, "Mr. Batts," I said, "What are you doing here so early in the morning?" And he said, "Son, I got to get a running start on the day." He said, "I got to be twice as good to get half as far." And he said, so he was like, that's just the approach you have to have. You have to have this work ethic. And when I would come in, he would say, "I'd love for you to come by. I'm going to keep working while we talk."
Wow. Right. I'm going to keep working while they talk. Don't miss what he said right there. I'm going to keep working while I talk. What's happening, y'all? This is Mike D with Black Fathers Now, where we're bringing the village to the brothers. Every couple of weeks, you can look forward to a quick inspirational message or a thought-provoking guest with knowledge and wisdom, all geared towards helping you be the best father that you can be. We're bringing the village to you. Now it's your turn to do something with what you learned. All right, y'all. Let's go. Please enjoy part 1 of my dynamic conversation with Renaissance communicator Hallerin Hilton Hill. Yeah, you're going to want to listen to both of these episodes because the brother brings the heat. What's going on, everybody? This is Mike D, Mr. Double Down on You, with another episode of Black Fathers Now. And I'm going to tell you, I have a brother, a legit Renaissance man, that's joining us today on this particular conversation. And this brother is none other than Hallerin Hilton Hill. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a Renaissance communicator who moves people with ideas. Grammy-nominated singer and songwriter, entrepreneur, speaker, longtime radio host, TV producer, and just so much more. When I say a Renaissance man, I ain't lying. Like Coming to America, he ain't lying. I'm telling the truth. Like, brother is a legit Renaissance man, and I really admire him. And we'll talk a little bit about his communication style and the questions that he asks, but then also the environments that he navigates in as a Black man and how he's able to do so from a place of conviction. Because again, I admire this brother a lot. And so without further ado, fellas and ladies listening too, because y'all like to tune in to what we're talking about, let's welcome Hallerin Hilton Hill. How you doing, brother?
Fantastic. Thank you for the honor of being on your platform and on your show. And thank you for what you're doing. Like I was saying in the walk-up, what you're doing is important. It matters. It's significant. So thank you for that.
Man, thank you, brother. Like I said, we're all here to do our part. You know what I'm saying? Like, if everybody does a little bit, then nobody has to do a lot. And then we can move this narrative forward and be all that we're called to be. So thank you for that. But also, I salute you as well.
Yes, sir.
And so before we get started, and everybody who listened to any of the 178 episodes of Black Fathers Now that have come on prior to, the recording of this one, we always start with shout outs because the tagline to Black Fathers Now is bringing the village to the brothers. And we know that, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, is extremely important. But every successful grown person, brother, individual has a village around them. And we like to put that out front because that's who allows us to be who we are. So before we get into your story, brother, give a shout out to your village, your support system, and your network, man.
Let me just start by acknowledging God.
Absolutely.
and acknowledging the divine. I think without that acknowledgement, the Creator is where I start. Specific to the context we're in, I have to thank my own dad. I have to give a shout out to my own father who has passed on, but I reflect on him and I give him a shout out. I give a shout out to my brothers, the ones that remain. I lost my oldest brother, but my brothers have been real important in my life. So I want to shout them out, Roland and Byron, and then my sister, who is, she is I call her a titanium angel, man. She is angelic, but she's also tough. She's a great woman of God. So I shout her out, and of course, my family. And then I have a network of college classmates. I went to Oakwood University, which is an HBCU, and there are probably 15 to 20 of us that get together on a conference call just about every Sunday night.
Wow.
We've been friends for, I don't know, some of us have been friends 40 years.
Wow.
Right?
That's amazing.
And to see these strong men, I mean, they're incredible. All of them doing incredible things wherever they are. Shout the fellas out. And every man in my life. One year I was a guest speaker for a 100 Black Men event. And as I was preparing, I was sitting in my study, and I asked myself the question, do I know 100 Black men that I admire?
Ooh, what? That's deep.
Isn't that a great question?
That is a fascinating question. Do I know 100 Black men that I admire? Like personally, no, not right. I see them on TV and I know their story, but that I can text or that I can pick the phone up, you know, that's fascinating. And that's a fascinating question.
So I made a list of people that I knew personally and people that I just admired from a distance. And I had a list of 100 people. I don't know how many I knew actually. I might have had a list of 40 or 50 men that I knew. Mm-hmm. But I realized that I was standing on the shoulders of all of those men, all of those touch points in my life, all of those, you know, those interactions of affirmation had a shaping and refining effect on me. So I shout out every Black man in my life that took a moment to affirm me. Mattered and matters. And I think we may not catch that. I think one of the survival skills that Black men develop is a hard exterior. And it really is a mechanism of survival. It's, you know, you get out there and if you show weakness, that doesn't always play well. And so we put on this hard exterior, and, you know, in some dynamics, it seems like weakness to even acknowledge or see one another. But I don't know which African language this comes from, but there's a word, sawabona. Means I see you.
I see you.
Right. And I think the response to it is something like Jabo or Jabo Sawabona, which is I see you seeing me. In other words, you matter to me. And
you matter to me.
All these, you know, all these different men in my life that I've come across that took just a moment to see me, right? To added some dimension to my life and gave me, okay, I have some worth and I have some value. So those are the people I like to shout out. They may not even know the significance of what they did. I think of this one, tell you this one quick story in the shout out.
Okay.
This guy has passed on, but his name was Sonny. And he was the first Black man that I met that was a full-time writer. I'd never seen a Black man earn a living just as a writer. That's all he did. And so and he was a great musician as well. And so I would hang out with him. He was maybe 15 years older than me. And he was a very elegant person, right? He was, I mean, a really refined, smart, he just was one of those brothers that was just put together, but he had a humility about himself that was very winsome. And I remember sitting in his apartment, and he had an older Black gentleman there that he was interviewing as part of a book he was writing. And then when we got done with that, we went to a coffee shop, and this is pre-Starbucks.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
This the
we
real
didn't,
coffee shops.
right. We didn't move like that. We
Uh-huh.
didn't move like that. And so we went to a coffee shop, and he had this really sporty, I love cars. He had this Volkswagen Rabbit GTI.
Oh, wow.
Took me on this twisty road and was showing me how I performed. And he just spent an afternoon with me. And I don't think he understood. And I probably was 15 years old. I don't think he understood the impact that it had on me. Impact number one was I got to see something different than what I knew.
Ooh,
I got
powerful.
to see something. I saw a man that had a lot of personal dignity and self-respect, and he found a way to make a living doing something creative like that. But then him taking the time just to spend an afternoon with the 15-year-old kid, and I just remember going, okay, I think I want to explore that possibility that I never thought existed. So that's just one example of a shout out that I would give to all of those men that were like that. Another man that was like that was a man by the name of Huntley Batts. He's alive now. He lives in Huntsville, Alabama. Big in the insurance business, and he owns radio stations as well.
Wow.
And I had my first job in radio when I was 16. So I'm about 40 years into the business now. And Mr. Batts, I was a manager of a radio station at the age of about 20. And so he took me under his wings in the town that I lived in. And what got me about him was on Saturday mornings, I would get up early in the morning to go sit in the park and think. And I would drive through downtown Huntsville, Alabama, and his office building one of his office buildings is in downtown Huntsville, Alabama. And it is not in the quote unquote black section of town. It's just right in the heart of downtown. And it's this office building, and his office is tucked in the corner of the office building, and the rest of it is leased out to all of these different people. And you would never know that he owns the building, right? His little insurance agency is in the corner of the building, but it doesn't look like it would belong to a black man. And I would drive past his building. It would be 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would see the light on in his office in the back of his building. And so I would knock on the door, and he'd let me in. And I remember one day I said, "Mr. Batts," I said, "What are you doing here so early in the morning?" And he said, "Son, I got to get a running start on the day." He said, "I got to be twice as good to get half as far." And he said, so he was like, that's just the approach you have to have. You have to have this work ethic. And when I would come in, he would say, "I'd love for you to come by. I'm going to keep working while we talk."
Wow.
Right.
I'm gonna keep working while they talk. Don't miss what he said right there. I'm gonna keep working while I talk. That says a lot. Like literally, that's a gem. Okay.
Right. So I would see this black man, and he would take me with him around. He would take me to Chamber of Commerce meetings. He would take me to, and he would be in these settings where he was the only black man doing business at the levels he was doing it. And I saw how he handled himself. And he took time with me. Right? I mean, this guy is a massive figure in my life. But he's just one of so many men. So when you said shout out, I'm sorry for eating.
No, this is awesome.
But those guys were, in so many words, they were fathers to me too, because of just, so I would never minimize. And that's why, at the opening here, that's why I was saying to you, what you do is significant. It's powerful. The way you're networking people together to have these conversations, what you're doing is of a higher order. It's really important.
Thank you. I mean, and I received that, and I thank you so much. And what's interesting about your shout outs, and this will lead into kind of your story as well, but you said a couple of things there. And one thing leads into a concept that I roll with a lot. And it's the concept of exposure leads to opportunity, right? It's like you don't know what you don't know, but exposure is needed to lead people to opportunity. And you seem to have had or been blessed to have had exposures early. But there's a couple things you mentioned. You said you used to sit in the park and think at 20 years old. Like, I want to dive into what led to you having that mindset at the age of 20 to just sit in the park and think. Like, I'm 40 now, and probably over the last decade have I really started to come to the understanding of the value prop of just finding time to think, finding time to process. But that's something that you did at the age of 20. That's one part. The other part was there was something inside of you that made you open to seeing or seeking opportunity at an early age. That's something, again, that's not always there because we're not training our minds per se to seek opportunities, but you seem to have done that at an early age. But then I'll also add something, because these two individuals that you mentioned specifically, and obviously there's a whole host of others, they saw something in you. And I think that's important for Black men to start grabbing individuals that you see talent, you see potential, and cultivating that potential. And I'll give an example in my own life. When I was doing pharmaceutical sales, I had a mentor who was my regional business director. So he was over the whole region of, the United States with one of the Fortune 500 big 5 pharma companies or whatnot. And when I had started, I was 24, just got into the business. And within the first 2 years, I was working conferences all over the country and flying to this event to represent this major organization at some trade show. Me, this young brother in Knoxville. I'm not from Knoxville, but living in Knoxville, Tennessee, I was given these opportunities, and there really wasn't anything overly special about me. But a regional business director who ultimately became one of my mentors, I asked him years later, I was like, so why is it that I was given these opportunities and nobody else was? And he said, Mike, I'm gonna be honest with you. I just gave you an opportunity to do things and see things that others have been able to see for years before you. So I was basically opening up the window for you to get some of the opportunities that the white boys were given. I was giving that opportunity to you. He pulled me in to help me to see things, to expose me to stuff on a different level because he saw something in me. And so when I hear your examples, I resonate with that because I thought back to my own experience of these individuals were pouring into me because they saw something.
Yeah. This is what you're saying brings up a lot of great emotion. It goes back to my father. Right. So, Black fathers now.
That's right. Now.
Love the word now because it means you got to be present.
Yes.
One of the acrostics that I use for the word now is to notice the moments that you're in. When you notice the moments you're in, to own those moments, to be part of creating something out of those moments that has value, which allows you to win those moments.
To notice, to own, and to win.
And to win the moment. Right?
I want to throw something on top of that. What word is there if you spell now backwards?
You won.
So if you focus on now, you can eventually spell it backwards.
You won. Right.
Deep.
So let me just start with my father, and I think that would be the genesis. And so right now I'm working on a new book, and it's called Joy 101, the toolkit for the well-lived life. I love learning. I've been studying positive psychology for the last 6 years independently. And as part of one of the online courses that I was taking, I had to do a 250 question character strength survey. Mm. And I was really surprised at the outcome of the survey because it identifies your top 5 character strengths. Because the whole idea is if you really want to live well, then you organize your life around your strengths. Mm. Right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that you don't try to improve your areas of weakness, but you leverage your strengths.
Yes,
and
right.
You enjoy life more. And so it gave me my 5 top, but my number 1 strength is love of learning.
That's deep.
It's the pinnacle. I'm happy when I'm growing. Right? That's when I'm learning something new, when I'm growing. I always knew that, but I didn't know it enough to be more intentional about organizing my life around that.
Wow.
It's funny, I always wanted to start this wisdom university, and it's been burning in my chest for 30 years. And I didn't know why do you want to create a learning platform and a learning, technology? That's who I am, right? Where did that come from? That's what you asked for. Where does this desire for growth come from? It came from my father, and this is the origin story. My father, one of 7 children born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in the year 1923. He was the oldest of 7, born to his mother at 16. And he was sort of like the father that his father wished he could have been. His father served in World War I, came home. He was a guy about 5'8". He may have weighed 130, 140 pounds. He looked like a little frail person. And part of it was his growth had been stunted as an orphan. My grandfather was found on the streets of Chattanooga, orphaned. And he was taken in by this wealthy white woman and was raised in this orphanage called the Steel Home for Children. But he had been malnourished, and I think that stunted his growth. But he had a family, comes back from the war. He goes to work for the King Pharmacy in Chattanooga, and he has this affinity for mixing drugs. So he literally worked upstairs in the pharmacy, and the pharmacist, they called him Doc. They say, "Hey, Doc, Miss Jones needs something for her cough." He would mix it. He would put the King Pharmacy label on it, and he would carry the mixture that he had made under another man's name on a bicycle to some person, and he was treated like he was a little boy. So he was suffering these indignities, and so he self-medicated with alcohol. So he had a problem with alcohol. And my father was a football player, and his Friday nights were spent. He would play football. His father wouldn't be there, and he'd get home. He'd change clothes, and his mother would send him out to go find his father at one of the various juke joints, and he would put his father on his shoulder and carry him home and dry him out. Brothers and sisters woke up.
Wow.
I was looking at a video of my uncle, who, by the way, ended up becoming a pharmacist.
Wow.
I'm sorry, a chemist for DuPont.
Wow.
Right?
The genetic lineage, right?
Right. All of this will factor into our conversation too. He said of my father, my father was the elegant father we always wanted. So he fathered his brothers. He said he taught us how to tie a tie. He carried himself with this dignity. He was the first one to go to college, and he gave us something to want to become. outside of
Aspirational.
outside of what we want. So here my father took on this really important optimism, and my father just decided that he was going to live a life beyond where he was. He was going to go to school, and he was going to figure out a way not to have to work by the sweat of his brow. He was going to develop and use his intellect as a platform for his future. And so he goes to college, he becomes a minister, he does whatever, but my father loved to read. And I love telling the story about my father because you said, where does this come from? And I think it's a great gateway into a conversation about fatherhood. My father, some kids that have a great father, there are a lot of people who don't have a great connection with their father. But some, you hear stories of my dad used to play ball with me. My dad was at every game. My dad was, which is great. My bonding experience with my father was around books. So his habit was to go to the library every Sunday afternoon, and he would get 2 books. He would take me with him. I remember him doing 2 things. On Saturday night, one of the security guards and janitors at the newspaper, we were living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel or something like that. He would pull up to the front of the building, and one of his friends would bring him out the Sunday paper Saturday night.
Wow.
Right.
So he had juice too.
He had juice, right? So I remember this big, thick newspaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was sitting on the seat of the car, and then Sunday afternoon, he would go to the library, and he would take me with him. And so I would pick out a kid's book, and my dad had this upholstered chair in the corner of his room. And let me just make this note as a nugget. He had a space in his home for learning, growth. Make space for it. Not only mentally, but physically, make space.
Wow.
And so he would sit in this upholstered chair, and he didn't watch television. He would watch the evening news, and that would be it. He might watch a little Johnny Carson, but he would sit in the chair and he would read at night. So I'd sit on the floor next to my dad, and I couldn't read as fast as he could read, but I could turn pages as fast as he turned pages. So I just pages until my mind caught up.
Wow. Woo. Pause. I just turned pages until my mind caught up.
Yeah.
That's you can't gloss over that. That is something, and that is not a fake it till you make it scenario. It's not putting on a persona. You turn pages fast until your mind caught up. But it started with the intention of, I want my mind to catch up to how fast I'm turning it, because I'm watching my dad turn these pages.
Yes.
Dude, and part of my personal development protocol with Double Down on You, there's a category called openness and intention. You have to be open, but then you also have to be intentional in regards to how you operate. Fellas, listen to the gem he just dropped. I turned the pages fast until my mind caught up.
Yeah. Right.
Deep.
So I'm sitting there, but this is the real, and this is something for all fathers to get, right? There is what we receive by DNA, right? What we get internally, the instruction set. The piece of you that you are comes from this mixture of chromosomes. It's mom and it's dad connecting to create a new you. And in that is an instruction set. It tells you who you are. So there's something that you are on the inside by virtue of who they were. So who you're becoming is what you're bequeathing. Right? When you develop yourself, that self-development, especially prior to having children, you're passing along that energy.
Yes. He's speaking my language. Yes.
Internally. That's the first part. But the other part is what's on the inside is also compounded by what's on the outside.
Mm.
So this is what my father did for me without me knowing. There was an energy around the reading of books, right? He had joy as he was reading books. It was a joyful enterprise for him. He wasn't reading or learning. It wasn't excruciating. It wasn't something he had to do.
Yeah.
It was something he needed, he wanted. And there was this joy around it. I wanted to be in that energy. I wanted to be in the wake of that joy. My mother battled with depression, and she radiated an energy. And I remember how difficult it was to reconcile the energy. Even though my mother's words were right, her energy was off because of what she was battling within her depression. It was not a fault of hers. It just was the reality of the dysfunction. And I remember battling that energy. But my father had this energy around him that he was generating by his love of learning. And so I made a subconscious connection between learning and joy.
Ooh, the joy learning connection. That sounds like another book as well.
Right? So imagine once you make that connection, right? And then this alpha male in your life, this iconic figure in your life is stamping you with that imprint. Internally, right? Education is what got him out of the level that, so he was literally trying to think his way to freedom. I would frame it. He literally was leveraging himself out of where he was through knowledge and through the joy of learning. And I remember he gave me my first library card, and I wish I could find it. And that would be so.
That would be awesome.
But I remember how he laid it in my hands. He told me to hold out we went to the library, we signed up, the lady put together, I remember the card was like orange, and they used to have when you opened the book, it had a little jacket in it that had a card in it.
Yeah.
Return date. You can Google all this stuff, guys.
Yeah, you got to be of a certain age to know about that.
Right. But I remember we were at the library in Milwaukee, and we're standing there in front of the desk where the lady has just made the card, and my father tells me to hold out my hands. And I held out both hands like this. And he took the library card and he placed it in my hand. Right? And he said, "You know what this is, right?" I said, "A library card?" He said, No. He said, "This is free tuition." He said, "Every time you want to learn something, every time you want to know something, this card will open you up to worlds where every library is your free, tuition-free university. Son, you're free to learn whatever you want to learn because you know how to read and you have access to the knowledge." Right? And I remember I got a little card, and I would go to the library. The funny thing is, whenever it carried me throughout my life. When my father and I when we would travel to other cities to visit relatives, my father didn't sit around in the family gossip. We'd be sitting there, we'd be in Milwaukee or Chicago, we'd be wherever. And when we're going to have a dinner that night, and everybody's sitting there just kind of talking and whatnot. And my dad would say, "Come on, Deke." And we would find the biggest library in town.
Wow.
Chicago has this fantastic library downtown. Boston has a fantastic library downtown. We would be, wherever we were, we would go into the biggest library there was. And it was like we were going into these cathedrals of knowledge. And my dad would just be like, he would just be lost. And we'd be among the stacks. Once again, it wasn't the books per se, it was living in the wake of that.
Yes.
And making that connection.
Bro, dude, I'm going to tell you, that story itself is fascinating on so many levels. the joy learning connection is one, but the notion of your dad, you know, when you think about what, how, and why, right? What is the books, but how he presented books to you. This is the gateway to learning. This is your free education. He presented it in a way, you know, there's and then the why behind it was your dad understood that these were the gateway. And so by you developing this joy of learning, you then have no limitations. Hence, anything will be possible. And I'll tell you what's interesting, man. The whole concept of how your father presented it. You know, I have a really good friend of mine who, when we were in high school, his mother passed away right before he went to college. And I remember at his mother's funeral, his brother was a minister, so his brother was doing the eulogy. And his brother was talking about how his mother was extremely focused on how things were presented. And he left a quote there, and this was over 20 years ago now. And he said his mother used to always say, information without presentation is just data.
Ooh.
That's it. Information without presentation is just data. And it's funny, that is something that over 2 decades from now, I've still internalized. But then when I look into today's landscape, you know, everybody's not a data scientist. Everybody's not in data analytics. Everybody can't transcribe an algorithm and all of that. So if you can't understand, and if things are not presented in a way that you can groove with, it ends up becoming just data. And for most people, like you mentioned, DNA, data just becomes numbers, bars, dots, dashes, and all of this stuff. And you can't do anything with it. So again, your father was attuned to the fact that I have to present this thing in a way that he can get it at this point, and it's going to groove with him. That's one. But you also mentioned this concept of DNA and how part of, you know, our genetic lineage leads to who we are. But you also opened up, and this is, again, another thing in which your father was attuned to, you know, even in his era, in his day and age, was the concept of epigenetics, right? How your environmental factors contribute to your gene expression. And so we can come from the gutter, you know what I'm saying? We can come from bad places, but there are environmental factors that have, and you mentioned subconsciously, you got to a place in which you started to internalize it. If we do that in our own lives, we can come from a not great place, but we can then use these environmental factors to then restructure how our genes express. And then you can see how folks turn the corner and they've basically come from nothing. So it's just like, I see all of these themes and stories in this one example of time with your father, going to the library, but then him also guarding you from various scenarios. So he knew the danger of gossip. He knew the danger of getting into the mix of all of that. So he saw that stuff coming. He was like, come on, Doc, let's ride out of here. It's like he saw it. Like, it's, to me, there was so much wisdom in just that exchange there that we need to be mindful of, because as elders to the generation coming behind us, we see stuff coming. We need to do that in the sense of, I see something come around the corner. I'm like, hey, young man, come on, come holler at me for a little bit. Let's take a ride. I'm guarding him from something that he doesn't even realize is a threat.
Right. So I think that was the opening that changed the way I saw learning and knowledge and wisdom. And when you become open to something, you start to see it.
Yes.
So I might not have seen Sonny, and I might not have seen Mr. Bats if I hadn't seen my father.
Ooh. Fellas listening, if you're raising kids, if you're a mentor, a big brother, an uncle, a coach, somebody who is in the life inspiring someone that's coming behind you, be mindful of the fact that your experiences and what you open that, individual who's following you up to is the gateway to them then seeing opportunities later in life. So don't miss out on opportunities to open people up, to expose the next generation. I mean, that's deep. And that came from your father, which even, oh my gosh, that's deep, brother.
I'm not totally sure that he was conscious of what he was doing. I do know that he was somewhat aware, but I mean, right up until the um, the last, I would go see my father often, and every time that I would go see him, I used to keep a duffel bag in the back of my truck, and I would always have 2 or 3 books.
Mm.
He knew that.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been, I've read some incredible books this year, but I'm always reading because I don't know that I love reading as much as I love learning. Like I
Mm.
said, there's an energy around it.
That's
And
right.
I asked my dad, I said, "Do you love to read that much?" He said, "No." He said, "I love learning that much." And he said, "Reading is my crowbar."
Mm.
He said, "Knock."
Wow. Wow.
so,
That's whew.
so, so right up until, some of my last memories of my dad was I would come, his vision was starting to go, and he would say, "What you reading?" I'd say, "I'm reading this book." He'd say, "Well, read it to me."
Mm.
I go get my duffel bag and I'd sit in his room and just read. I was his audible.com.
Mm. Back before Audible. You were Audible before Audible.
Right. And I would think that he was dozing off, and I'd try to stop reading. He'd go, "No, no, no, keep going, keep going." I mean,
Mm.
so he was loving learning even at that age, and I think that's what opened me up. That was, I mean, I've taken an incredibly long route to getting to answer your simple question was, what was it that opened you so you could see that?
Mm.
And I think that's what it was.
Man, that's I'm gonna tell you the concept of learning and reading. And again, you didn't hip me to this being the trajectory or the storyline that you were going to talk about prior to our conversation. And it's ironic, okay? And maybe not so ironic. I think the Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes the ways ain't so mysterious. I want you to look at something. What does this shirt show you?
So the guy sitting on his basketball reading.
Is that not? I mean, dude. A lot of times, and this is one of the shirts from my apparel line. A lot of times I wear like a Black Fathers Matter shirt or whatever when I'm doing the interview, and I just happen to put on the Yes Boys Read T-shirt today. And who'd have thunk that? Again, I say the Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes He ain't so mysterious. He's right in your face. He's like, "Look, dude, open your eyes. It's right there." And I was just sitting there thinking, I'm like, "This is crazy."
Get that shirt, by the way, y'all. Get that shirt.
Yeah, get that shirt. Yes, boys read. BlackFamilyApparel.com. But yeah, man, it's just like, and what's interesting, as you start to share that one story about your dad, and I think to your radio show now, or when you do interviews, when a caller calls in, or when you're, talking or having a dialogue with someone, you tend to start with this one phrase or this one question, and you say, "What do you think? And why do you think it?" Right? And what's funny about that is, what do you think? Nah, that's easy. I mean, that's basically somebody giving their opinion. The deep question that people aren't always capable of really articulating is the why do you think it? Because to me, it goes into two different directions. A lot of times it's either, well, I read something and that aligns with my political ideology and whatever, and that's really not a why. You're just basically finding something easy that grooves with who you are. But the real why do you think it is this deep dive reverse engineering back to situations like, why do I think it? Well, I love learning. Well, why do you love learning? Because my father opened up this window to me, and he showed me the intersectionality of joy and learning. And he also showed me how learning is the gateway for me to get to a place in which anything is legitimately possible.
Yeah, you're spot on. Another example of my father, and I'll kind of knit this into how it factors into my life as a father. I have 2 children, and I would not credit myself as being a great father for most of their lives. I think some of my failings as a father really helped me gain so much more insight. But my mother was an extremely stern woman. And the how rigid and stern Black parents were when I was growing up really was a prophylactic. they were trying to guard us from being swept into systems where we wouldn't have control. And so they were very authoritarian, and it was fear. It was, my son is out there in the street and he's rebellious and he's this or that.
I'm gonna beat it out of him.
Right. Once he gets swept up into their system, there is no mercy. There may be very little justice. So I'm gonna scare the hell out of him.
Absolutely.
Right? My mother was an incredibly stern woman. She was no jokes. I like to say she was a stick of dynamite wrapped in velvet and laced with a 1-inch fuse that had been dipped in gasoline.
Oh Lord!
It didn't take nothing but a spark.
Right? Look, they lived in a house full of matches.
So I have this blood-borne curiosity. I'd love to tinker. I like to think. I like to pull things apart to see how they work. That's my dad's fault. It's her fault too, because she was insanely creative. So I remember we had this guest bedroom, and it had these 2 single beds, and it had these beautiful white bedspreads, and you weren't supposed to go in there. It's just like that living room that has plastic on the furniture, and you don't go in there. But I love to play on these bedspreads because the bedspreads had these channels in it that looked like highways. And so I'd take my little Hot Wheels cars and I would literally drive around the world on these bedspreads. And so I remember I was in there playing on these white bedspreads, and I remember I had some radios or something that I was taking apart. And I had some stuff plugged in, and I'm taking it apart, and I got cars all over the bed, and something sparked and burned a hole into the bedspread.
Whoa.
So I burned this hole. I'm like, oh, here comes this lady. And my mother smells something burning. She comes in there, and she just absolutely loses. When your father gets home, so my father comes home, and she is livid. And she says, you need to go in there and talk to that boy. So he goes, okay. So he walks in the room and he shuts the door behind him. And he looks at me. He looks left, right. He winks at me. And he goes, what's going on in here? Right? I'm standing there like, and then he comes over closer to me and he said, what do you think happened? What do you mean? He said, no, calm down. What do you think was the chemical or electrical reaction that happened to burn the hole in the mattress? Well, I think such and such. He said, why do you think it overheated? What do you think is going on there? We were having, we were having a science lab.
Yes.
Right? So we clean up, and I'm sitting there going, well, why did that happen? What did I do? Did I cross some wires? Did I do whatever? This is the truth. That year on my birthday, he bought me my first electronic set.
Oh, dude. Man, can I tell? Again, your father, like, there was so much wisdom there. So if you look at like the tech industry and you hear about like innovation and MVPs and startups and all of that, you hear the concept, or this concept used to float around, and it said move fast and break things. Right? That was the whole concept. Move fast and break things. Meaning if you're breaking things and you're moving fast, you're getting somewhere. You're trying, right? But that usually does not flow in the Black community or the African-American demographic. We try not to break things. We want to don't let that fall off the shelf. Don't tear that thing up. It's this scarcity mindset at times, but a lot of it is rooted in history, right? Your father had the wisdom back in the day to tell you to move fast and break things. But there was another thing because he was such, a big proponent of learning, when he saw you having an interest in something, he poured gasoline on that fire and allowed it to burn. Fellas, Pay attention to that. Again, I'm not saying to tell your kids to go and just start breaking stuff because then your wife gonna put you on the couch perpetually. I'm not advocating that because the couch is, I'm hitting 40, so the couch is not good too often throughout we'll talk later about that. But when you notice things and you see that there's some level of interest in something, as opposed to punishing, sometimes take a step back and see if there's an opportunity, because how many world-renowned chemists started from burning stuff up? How many world-renowned chefs started from burning dinners and whatever? How many engineers started from breaking every radio in the house, that you now hear about? How many of these startup guys who have multi-billion-dollar organizations had failures before, or their parents allowed them to screw up and fail a little bit? Like, failure's not always fatal. Sometimes it's just a learning opportunity. But if you see that there's this twinkling of a itch or whatnot that your kids have, pour a little bit of gasoline on it and see where it goes. Coming from that era, I'm trying to tell you, dude, like, it's so fascinating. An African-American man who was born in 1923 had the wherewithal when you were a kid, and I'm not going to tell your age, but I guess it was a little older than I am, but had the wherewithal a few decades ago to think that way, because that was so countercultural to stay in your lane, do what you're supposed to do, follow the rules, don't break nothing, you better be scared, keep your head down, forget all of that. He's like, no, how does this thing work? Let's tinker with it. Like,
yeah, he was insistent upon personally, and then he pushed it probably more to me than maybe even my siblings. He was insistent on you being an original thinker.
Ooh, Lord,
he was insistent on it. He was like, be original. And it's funny, in this list of character strengths that came up for me, creativity, ingenuity, and originality showed up as, I think, like number 4. Once again, but this is the impact of a father. There's a distinction between curiosity and rebellion.
Ooh, expound upon that.
He could tell the difference between my native curiosity and whether or not I was just in the bedroom, just messing up the bedroom because I'm being rebellious to my parents. The difference between curiosity and rebellion. And so I think he didn't want to stamp out that fire. But I think he also was trying to be a ballast against something else that I was experiencing. Number one, he knew what was going on with my mother, and he knew how that was infecting and affecting our family system. And I think he was trying to counterbalance that because he knew about his own family system. He knew what it was like to kind of live through dysfunction. And so his optimism in the face of that dysfunction, he saw that. But then he also saw the penalty that I was paying for being a curious, precocious young kid. It didn't play well in the streets. It did not play well in the streets. Punk, sissy, faggot. Those were the things that I was called on a repetitive and regular basis in my neighborhood.
Because you weren't in line. That's right. Because you weren't in line with what everybody else was doing.
You could talk to my best friend, John Wright, and he will tell you that when we were 16 years old, we go to this party, and I literally go to the party with all my friends and everybody's dancing, and I literally am sitting in the corner and I'm reading a book at a party.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I literally am reading a book while Flashlight is playing.
Oh, P-Funk is dropping Flashlight. And you're like, give me a flashlight so I can read this page, man. I'm in the...
Literally, no, this is a true story. And literally, this girl comes over to me and she said, are you literally reading a book at a party? And I was like, yeah, I'm reading a book. So I get bullied, I get made fun of, and my father is conscious of the forces that are fighting against this beautiful thing, right? Wisdom and learning and just the joy of growth itself had been such a savior to him. He didn't want to see that get stamped out in me. But then he was adding a measure of affirmation so that I wouldn't resign from that just for the counterfeit of affirmation.
Ooh, dude, that again, wisdom, insight, but then you also throw another component of discernment. So being able to discern whether or not this is curiosity or rebellion, you know, but then also understanding you and spending time and knowing who you are. Like your father, you know, it's like a lot of us don't spend enough time, even though we might physically be in the same space, we don't spend enough time with each other to truly know each other. That's dangerous. But the other part to it is we don't do the same thing with ourselves. You know, being by yourself and spending time with yourself are two different things, right? It's like being by your wife and spending time with your wife are two different things. You know, you can be by her and don't know what's going on. You're spending time with her, you're paying attention, you're understanding. And the same thing happens with your kids. When you pay attention, when you're spending time with them and you understand the nuances of who they are, then you are properly equipped to help counterbalance those forces that they are going to face or that they are currently facing. But if we don't spend that time, we don't know. And we're just throwing, you know, it's like a shot in the dark. We're throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And that might work, that might not, but it's a gamble versus spending time to know what is really making this person tick. Right. Let's get to that.
There was something really interesting that happened. There was something really interesting that happened later on in my life was, and I think he knew I would get to this point of personal and intellectual liberty. There was a point at which I didn't need the verification of a group of peers in order to pursue what I was called to. Because I didn't grow up getting that. Later on, you don't grow up needing that.
From peers. You got it from your father.
Right.
But you didn't need it from those external like friends. And I don't care if you like this or like that. I wasn't seeking that external validation.
But I ended up with a group of peers. Because of that, who actually like the fact that I think for myself.
Wow.
Right.
That's fascinating because you tend to eventually you gravitate to your tribe, so to speak. Eventually. Right. I mean, it might happen when you're a kid. It might not be until you're in your 40s or 50s that you finally find your tribe. But when you get there, it's like you've been cultivated for this, but you also had the patience to hold off or hold out until my tribe formed. And so to me, it's kind of like delayed gratification because if you're a person who needs external validation, then you're like, you know, forget it. Even though I know I don't groove with this group and it's not great for me, I need somebody to validate who I am. So I'm just going to fall in line with them. But that's to your detriment, literally, typically, unless you have the wherewithal to have patience enough to wait until that tribe forms, then you can freely be yourself.
Right. It's a beautiful place to be. And I think how all of this leaches over into, you know, my experience as a father. I have two children. My son, Hallerin, the second, he'll be 32. Well, I guess he'll be 32 this year. And he's such a great person. I really like him. And then my daughter will be 26. And I was running from poverty most of my life. Because functionally I did not have an understanding of wealth, right? I thought it was financial, pure, and wealth is a state of mind.
Absolutely.
It is assets over liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So, in running from the poverty that I saw, because we were poor, like we were rich, you know, in that, but the knowledge and wisdom thing hadn't paid off in net worth.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So when I started out as a father, man, I, you know, married at 22, and I built my understanding of being a father on staying in the relationship, number one, and then number two, being a provider.
Mm.
That was the assessment that I made early on. I'm gonna go get it for my family. I'm a grind. So I've always been a 3 to 5 job person most of my life. I'm getting it, right. That being a provider actually put me in a position where I got what I thought were excused absences.
What you thought were. Gotcha.
Thought were excused absences, right? So if you're working, first of all, if you're working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, you are inefficient.
Absolutely.
The gold standard is to figure out a way to balance your life so that you have so much impact within a tighter window. You get more output out of a tighter window that you have more time for the balance of your life. But I'm working 18-hour day. I mean, I would grind because I had all of these. I made an assessment of myself where I was, and I had read the parable of the talents. And basically, the story of the parable of the talents in the Bible is God put something in your hand, double it.
That's right. Multiply. That's right.
Just double what you got. Just double what you got. And so I made an assessment of what I thought were the 5 strong areas of my life. And I said, could I turn each one of these into a stream of income? And so I ranked them 1 through 5 with the one that would have the greatest impact on top. And I said, I'm going to allocate my time and resources to each of these 5 areas based on what its ROI would be. But I was engaging all of them, and I started, you know, having these streams of income based on those things. But it took me away from my family. So the first decade of being a father, if I were rating myself, I would say I sucked because I just wasn't, I was there, but I wasn't present.
That's right. That's right.
And that's one note that I want to make is your presence, like you were mentioning this earlier, being present, being in the now, will do more for your kids than you could ever imagine. And they don't know how to convey to you the importance of it. And so you won't feel the validation now because they don't know how. They don't have the language. They'll be 50-year-old, 40-year-old men, and it'll open up to them, but they can't language it now because children are inherently selfish.
They're born that way.
You know, and teenagers are, good God.
Mine are 9 and 7. I hadn't gotten there yet.
And our culture is so self-obsessed. So first decade, but I started to get a little bit better later on. And I've watched it come full circle. My kids are trying to get after it in their lives. My daughter, I would sit and read. I would read to her every night. I remember I moved my daughter. She graduated from, got her master's from Savannah College of Art and Design in creative writing. And I had to move her from Savannah to Asheville. And so we went to move her apartment, and I get a U-Haul. And I was so tired after moving her, and it wasn't because of the couch. It was because of the books.
Wow.
Box upon box upon box of books. She had a bookshelf in her bedroom, and it was just full of books. When she was a little girl, the bookshelf was full of books. And it was a direct outgrowth of laying there reading books with her. Now she's a creative writer. We would lay in the bed, and her name is Hallie Nicole Hill. And I would mispronounce her name on purpose. I would say, Hallie and a goat named Bill. No, that's not my name. And I'd say, no, Hallie is this magical little girl, and she has this invisible goat named Bill, and they save the world, right?
Wow.
And I would say, where's the goat? And she'd go, Bill is right over there. And I would start these stories, and then she would finish the story. I'd go, well, what happens next? And she'd say, Bill is doing whatever. And so she came to visit. She's now at working at the University of Wyoming, but she came and we spent a Saturday morning having breakfast together. And we sat there and she was unpacking for me her creative process, how she writes. She just finished her first big short story, was published by the literary journal, the Oxford American. And she was walking me through her process, her creative process. And she was talking about how she imagines things and all that kind of stuff. And she said to me in one of our conversations, she said, thank you for letting me be me. She said, I never felt the pressure to be anybody else or you. Right?
Ooh.
Right?
Ooh.
Now, that in and of that all by itself, right? I remember looking at my daughter. She's made all these different choices, and she would ask me what I think. And she was about to go to a school, and we went and visited the school, and I went with her on the tour. And she asked me what I thought about this particular college, and I gave her this clinical analysis. I said, well, let's go over facilities, and let's go over curricula, and let's go over finances. And I had done this, this
spreadsheet. Yeah. You had a spreadsheet. Look, we can go line by line. Yeah.
And then my wife was like, what did you say to her? I said, well, I told her this, and she was torn up, right? And I asked my daughter, and she said, I just wanted to know if you thought I make good decisions.
Woo!
Right?
She wanted validation from her father, just like you got validation from your father. And we talk about the genetic lineage of how this thing starts, how we get the ball rolling, the snowball effect. And I'll tell you what's so powerful. The lineage of your father will live on for generations to come, because guess what she's going to do? Guess what your son is going to do? And it's like, I interviewed a brother not long ago, and one of the things he talked about in his life was, he said, I want to create artifacts, right? He's like, my whole job or my goal is to create artifacts. And, and I agreed with him during the interview, but I thought back on it afterwards, and I thought to myself, I'm like, my job is not to create artifacts. It's to help create an environment in which artisans can be created, because the artisans are the ones who then have the capacity to cultivate the artifact or to build something else or to create something else. So it's not about the artifact. To me, it's about the artisan. And that was a methodology or a method that was started by your father.
Right. That's the impact, and that's the power of it, right? And so my son is working for a tech company, and he just started his master's. I see them pursuing their dreams, their goals, their aspirations. I see it, and they feel there's an urgency inside of them to grow and to learn. But we never sat down at the kitchen table and did a 5-part seminar on this is. So
you just modeled it. It was modeled.
Right.
It was modeled. That kids don't always do what they're told, but there's a very strong likelihood that they replicate what they see.
Yeah.
right? So if you're reading books, eventually you'll see your kid pick up a book and lay there. I have a powerful example. One day I had my little podcast thing set up on the table, and I had left the room and went outside and did something. And I came back. My little boy had the microphone in his hand. My little girl was holding the light behind my laptop, like she was directing it. And my little boy said, "This is Mike D, Mr. Double Down on You." Like he literally was going verbatim with it, because I'm not teaching them, hey, you need to say it this way. They're watching, they're paying attention, they're learning. And it's, fellas, that's important. Pay attention to that gym. It's not always what you say, it's what you do, because they're watching what you do, whether they're giving you feedback in the moment or not.
I do want to say this too.
This concludes part 1 of my dynamic conversation with Renaissance communicator Hallerin Hilton Hill. Yeah, make sure to tune in to part 2, because he brings it. Yo, fellas, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And always, always, always visit blackfathersnow.com, as well as follow Black Fathers Now on virtually every social media platform you can think of. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. Just follow us and engage with us, man. Look forward to hearing from you. And I guess until next time, I'll holler at you. Peace.